For 31 years, my job was to look at a set of facts and decide whether they were suspicious. That is not a figure of speech. That was the job description. I worked in financial crime compliance for a British building society, and then for a mid-tier bank, and the technical term for what I produced is a suspicious activity report. Somebody's account behaves in a way that does not match what they told us about themselves. A dormant account wakes up. Cash arrives in amounts that sit just below a reporting threshold. Too neatly, too often. A 70-year-old with a modest pension suddenly receives 11 transfers from 6 people she has no evident connection to. My team looked at that, and we asked the questions, and we wrote it up, and we sent it on. I trained people to do this. I wrote the training. There is a module still in use somewhere, or there was in 2019, that I built from scratch on source of funds versus source of wealth. And the whole thrust of it was one idea I must have said out loud 4,000 times in my career. The question is not whether you trust the person. The question is whether you have looked. In February 2025, 2 officers from the Chonburi Provincial Police and 1 from the Anti-Money Laundering Office came to a rented townhouse off Soi Buakhao in Pattaya, and they had a file, and my name was on it. And it had been put there by a fraud report filed by a Thai commercial bank. I had never in my life been the subject of a report. I had generated, at a rough estimate, 9,000 of them. I need to say at the outset that I have been over this so many times that I no longer entirely trust my own account of it, and I am going to flag that whenever it happens, rather than pretend to a confidence I do not have. I have a folder now. Everything is in the folder. When I tell you a date, it is because I have looked it up, and when I cannot look it up, I will say so, because the alternative, a man narrating from memory as though memory were reliable, is the exact failure mode I spent 3 decades warning other people about. The divorce came through in June 2016. 34 years, 2 sons, no third party on either side, just the slow discovery that we had run out of anything to say. Angela kept the house in Wokingham, and I took a larger share of the pension, which at the time felt like the sensible allocation, and later felt like a man who had chosen liquidity over a life. We are civil. She sent a card when all this happened. I have not replied, which is my failing rather than hers. I retired in October 2019, 60 years old, with a defined benefit pension that would pay me about $28,000 a year, and a pot of roughly £280,000 I had built up separately. And then in 2021, I sold the flat in Reading, and after the mortgage, that added another £420,000. I want to state that figure plainly, because it is the number the rest of this story eats. Then the pandemic. I spent it alone in a 2-bedroom flat, and I do not intend to describe those 18 months, except to say that I came out of them with a very clear and slightly frightening understanding that I had built a life with no load-bearing walls in it besides work, and that work had ended. Thailand was Ian's idea. Ian had been my opposite number at a competitor for years, retired 18 months before me, and had been in Jomtien since 2018 and would not stop sending photographs of his lunch. I flew out in November 2021, 3 weeks after they reopened the country, on a test-and-go entry that required a hotel booking and a PCR test, and a piece of paper called a Thailand pass that I filled in 4 times before it was accepted. I remember that detail vividly, and I remember almost nothing about the flight. I liked it immediately, and I liked it for a reason that I think is worth stating, because it is not the reason people assume. It was not the weather, and it was not, God help us, the nightlife. It was that Pattaya, in November 2021, was a town that had been 3/4 destroyed and was visibly deciding to come back. Half the shops on Second Road were shuttered. The ones that were open had people in them working 18-hour days. There was something in that I found extraordinarily moving after 18 months in a flat in Berkshire. And I want that on the record, because everything that follows makes more sense if you understand that I did not arrive here cynical or hunting for anything. I arrived here impressed. I met Aom on the 9th of February 2022. That date I am sure of, because it was 2 days after my 63rd birthday, and Ian had insisted on a late celebration. She was 31, and she was not working in any of the industries. A story like this is expected to involve And I say that not to defend her, but because the truth is more useful than the shape people expect. She was running a small grocery shop, a proper one, with a metal shutter and a chest freezer, and a rack of instant noodles, and a woman's whole day spent behind a counter. It was on a Soi Buakhao, the sort of shop that serves the people who live in the rooms above the shops. And she had taken it over from a cousin in 2020, and had kept it alive through the worst 2 years anyone there could remember. I bought a bottle of water and a packet of paracetamol. My Thai was, at that point, comprehensively terrible. She corrected my pronunciation of the number 35 and made me say it 3 times, and then laughed at me. And I stood in a shop in the heat, feeling something I had not felt in about 6 years, which was ordinary. I went back the next day. I went back most days for a fortnight before I asked her anything. Here is what she told me about herself over the following months, and I have set it out the way I would have set out a customer file, because I want you to see it exactly as I saw it, and judge for yourself. 31. Born in Sa Kaeo province near the Cambodian border. Came to Pattaya at 19. Worked in a laundry, then in a hotel housekeeping department, then in a mobile phone shop, then took over the grocery from her cousin. Divorced from a Thai man in 2017, no children, which she said with a flatness that I did not probe and now think I should have. Mother alive in Sa Kaeo, father dead. An uncle, Thawi, her mother's brother, who lived in Pattaya, and who she described as being in business, and who I met perhaps 5 times in 3 years, and who was always perfectly pleasant to me, and who I now understand I never asked a single question about. Every element of that was true. I have since verified all of it. That is not the part that was false. We were together for 7 months before anything financial happened between us, and I want to be careful here, because I know how this reads. It reads as grooming, as a long con with a patient operator, and I have had 2 years to consider whether that is what it was, and I have concluded that it is probably not, or at least not at the beginning, and that the truth is considerably more uncomfortable. I do not believe she was waiting for me. I believe she was a woman running a shop on a sowa in a town that had just been economically flattened, who met a foreign man with a pension, and who did not initially have a plan, and who was connected by blood to people who did have a plan, and who noticed me before she did. The first money was in September 2022, and I proposed it. The shop's landlord was selling the building, and the new owner wanted the unit for something else. She was going to lose it in 90 days. She told me this at the counter one afternoon in the flat. Undramatic way, she told me everything, and she did not ask me for anything. And I want to be very precise about that because I have replayed the conversation perhaps 200 times looking for the ask, and it is not there. She said she would find something else. She said it was fine. 3 days later, I found a 2-story shop house for lease, 400 meters away, better position, and I went to look at it on my own before I said a word to her. The lease was 3 years with a 2-year option, and the landlord wanted key money of 800,000 baht, roughly 18,700 pounds at the rate that month, plus 12 months rent in advance at 22,000 a month, plus a deposit. The fit-out came to another 650,000 baht by the time we had done the shelving and the 2 commercial chillers and the shutter and the electrical work, which was more extensive than I expected because the building's supply was frankly dangerous, and she needed a stock float. I put in 1.2 million baht for that, which was more than she asked for, because I had run the numbers on the shop's takings, and I knew that a bigger float meant better purchasing and better margins, and I wanted her to have it. 2.94 million baht, about 68,000 pounds. And here is the thing I need you to sit with, because it is the reason I am telling this at all. The lease is in my name, not hers, mine. I insisted on it, over her objection, and I insisted on it for a reason that I would have defended in a boardroom, and which was, in its own narrow terms, completely correct. I had just put 68,000 pounds into a leasehold interest, and Thai law does not permit me to own the land, and I knew that. I had read about it before I ever got on the plane. But a lease of immovable property registered in my own name is a right I can hold as a foreigner, and it binds the landlord's successors, and it was the only instrument available to me that would give me any protection at all on that money. A compliance officer protecting his position. Textbook. I was rather pleased with myself. The utilities went into my name because the lease was in my name, and that is what the electricity authority requires. The tenancy was registered with the local authority in my name. The water, the internet, the business address on the paperwork we filed, all of it, me. I built, quite deliberately and quite carefully, a documentary structure in which every official record connecting a human being to that building pointed at a 63-year-old British man who was not there. The shop opened on the 11th of November, 2022, and for about 4 months, it was the happiest period of my adult life, and I include my sons being born in that assessment, which I recognize says something unflattering about me. I was there most days. I did the stock reconciliations, because of course I did. I built her a spreadsheet. I identified that she was losing about 9% on soft drinks by buying through a local distributor instead of the cash and carry out on Sukhumvit Road, and I hired a pickup one Tuesday and proved it, and she conceded the point with an expression I would characterize as amused tolerance. We put in a second chiller in March. The takings went from about 11,000 baht a day to 19. I was, for the first time since October 2019, useful. The investment came in March 2023, and it did not come from her. It came from Thawi, at a meal, with her translating, and it was presented to me as a family thing and an ordinary thing, and the important point is that it is an ordinary thing. It is a real institution. In Thai, it is called Len Chair, and it is a rotating savings and credit association, a group of people who each contribute a fixed sum on a fixed cycle, and each cycle one member takes the pot, bidding against the others for the privilege by offering a return to the rest. Millions of Thai people use them. They exist in Nigeria and Mexico, and the Caribbean and Korea, under different names. My own grandmother in Kilburn was in something functionally identical run out of a church hall in the 1950s. Thawi's version was described to me as a larger and more organized one. A community fund, he said. Members contribute. The fund lends to members, and to people the members vouch for. The fund takes a margin. The margin is distributed. Small business people, market traders, motorcycle taxi drivers who need a new bike. People, he said, that the banks will not lend to because they have no payslip and no collateral. I asked questions. I want that on the record, because the version of me that emerges from this story otherwise is a man who asked nothing, and that is not what happened. I asked about the return, 18% annually, which I noted was high, but which is not absurd for unsecured lending to a segment with no other access to credit. I asked about default rates. He said between 4 and 6%, which was plausible. I asked whether it was registered, and he said it was a community fund, not a company, and that is entirely normal and entirely legal for a genuine rotating savings group in Thailand, and I knew it. I asked to see the numbers. He brought me numbers at the next meal, in a hardback ledger, handwritten, in Thai, which Alm read out to me line by line for about 40 minutes while I made notes. And I looked at those numbers, and I want to tell you exactly what I saw, because this is the part that keeps me awake. They were good numbers. They were coherent, internally consistent, correctly totaled. The lending book grew at a rate that matched the contributions. The default provision was appropriate. I have thought about this a great deal, and I do not believe those figures were fabricated. I believe they were the real numbers of a real lending operation, shown to me honestly, in a ledger I could not read, and had read to me by a woman I loved. What I did not do, and there is no version of this where I get to soften it, is ask a single question about the borrowers. Not one. In 31 years of professional life, I had never once looked at a lending book without asking who the counterparties were, on what terms, secured against what, with what enforcement mechanism on default. That is not an advanced question. That is the first question. That is the question I would have failed a graduate trainee for not asking. I put in 2.2 million baht in March 2023, about £51,000. And in November 2023, after 3 quarterly distributions had arrived exactly on time and to the baht, I put in another 2.6 million. 61,000, 4.8 million baht, 112,000 pounds. Combined with the shop house, I now had 180,000 pounds of a £420,000 retirement in a Soi Buakhao. Ian said something to me in July 2023, and I have to report it accurately, even though it does me no credit at all. We were at the Thai Italian place on Theppersit, and he asked what the money was going into, and I told him, in some detail, because I was proud of the analysis. And he listened, and he ate. And then he said, "What happens to someone who doesn't pay?" I said something about the community structure. Social pressure. Everyone knows everyone. And he said, "Yeah, that's what I mean." I changed the subject. I did it smoothly, the way you do, when someone has said the thing you have decided not to think about. And Ian is a polite man, and he let me. And we talked about something else for 2 hours. Here is my honest attempt at explaining the blind spot, and I have had specialist help with this, and I still do not think I have it entirely. I did not fail to apply my professional judgment because I was infatuated. That is the easy answer, and I have rejected it. Infatuation would have made me generous, and I was generous. But generosity is not the failure. The failure was that I had spent 31 years operating a set of analytical tools inside a container labeled work, and when I retired, I put the container down, and I never once considered that the tools might apply to my kitchen table. They were professional instruments. This was my life. Those were, in my head, 2 different rooms, and I had never had cause to notice that I kept them separate, because for 34 years my domestic finances had consisted of a joint account, a mortgage, and Angela. There is a version of this that is almost funny. I could have told you, in 2023, off the top of my head, the 6 indicators of a lending operation being used to launder proceeds. I could have listed the red flags for consumer credit abuse. I ran a workshop on predatory lending in 2011, and I sat at a table in Pattaya and received a handwritten ledger and asked about default rates and yield, and never asked what a defaulting borrower was actually made to do, because the woman reading me the numbers was the woman I ate dinner with every night, and that put the entire conversation in the other room. The rest of 2023 and most of 2024 were, from where I sat, uneventful and rather good. There were things. I am going to list them because I have listed them so many times now that they come in a fixed order, and the order is itself a symptom of something my counselor and I are working on. The back room of the shop house was hers. She used it for stock and for the shop's paperwork, and I had no reason to go in there, and did not. And it had a padlock on it from about April 2023, which I noticed, and about which I said nothing, because it contained stock and cash. And a padlock is what you put on a room like that. There were visitors in the evenings. Women, mostly, sometimes with a man, coming into the shop after 7, and going into the back, and coming out 10 minutes later. I assumed she was selling on credit, running a tab for regulars, which every small shop in Thailand does. I was right about that, in a sense. I was catastrophically wrong about the scale and the terms. Twice, in 2023, I came in and she and Thawi stopped a conversation. Everyone who has ever been in a relationship in a language they do not speak knows that feeling, and knows that it means nothing 99 times out of 100. She acquired a second phone in about the middle of 2023. She said the shop needed a separate number for suppliers, which was reasonable, and which was also true, and which was also not the whole reason. In February 2024, a woman came into the shop and spoke to Aum in a raised voice for perhaps 90 seconds, and then left. I asked what it was, and she said the woman was upset about a debt to somebody else and had come to the wrong place. I accepted that. I want to note that I accepted it in about 4 seconds. And in March 2024, a man I had never seen sat on a plastic stool outside the shop for the better part of an afternoon, doing nothing, and when I mentioned it, she said he was waiting for someone. That is the complete list. 5 items over 18 months. And I have to be honest that if you gave me that list about a stranger's business, in a file, on a Tuesday morning in 2013, I would have opened an investigation before lunch. My mother died on the 2nd of April 2024. She was 91. It was not a surprise. And it was still the worst week of my life, for reasons that had nothing to do with anything else in this story. I flew back on the 4th, and what I thought would be 3 weeks became 6 months, because my mother had lived in the same house in Solihull since 1968, and had thrown away nothing. and because my brother is in Vancouver and could not come, and because probate on an estate with an unregistered title and a share portfolio her late husband had assembled in the 1970s is not a 3-week job. I was in England from the 4th of April to the 11th of October 2024, 190 days. I paid the shop's rent from England by standing order. I sent money for stock. We spoke every day, video calls, sometimes twice, and she was warm, and she was normal, and she asked about the house clearance, and remembered the names of my mother's neighbors. In August, she told me the fund had grown, and asked whether I wanted my quarterly distribution reinvested, and I said yes, obviously, because it was performing at 18%, and I was in a cold house in the West Midlands, sorting through 40 years of a dead woman's paperwork, and it was the one part of my life that was working. For 190 days, a 2-story shop house leased in my name, with utilities in my name and a tenancy registered in my name, at an address I was not within 6,000 miles of, was under the sole control of somebody else. That is not a moral observation. That is a control failure, and it is the specific one that every institution I ever worked for has a named policy about. And the policy is that you do not leave a single individual with unsupervised control of an asset and a set of records for an extended period without a compensating check. I did not have a compensating check. I had a video call. I came back on the 11th of October, and I knew something was wrong within about 4 days, and I could not have told you what. And that gap, between knowing and being able to name it, is the thing I have not recovered from. The shop was different. Empty. Not badly stocked exactly, but thinner. The shelves faced forward to hide gaps. The way a shop looks when someone has stopped ordering properly. Takings, when I asked, were fine. She showed me the till figures and they were fine. But I had run that spreadsheet for 18 months, and I knew what 19,000 baht a day looks like on those shelves, and it does not look like that. The back room now had 2 padlocks. There were more evening visitors, and they were no longer only women, and some of them did not buy anything. And one of them, I remember this precisely, looked at me when he came in, and looked at me again on the way out, and it was not a hostile look. It was worse than that. It was the look of a man taking note of a fixture. She was different too, and I want to describe this carefully because it is the thing that made me start behaving in ways I am not proud of. She was not colder. She was more attentive. She was more affectionate than she had been in a year, and she was tired in a way that sleep did not touch. And twice in November I woke and she was not in the bed and there was a light on downstairs at 2:30. I started checking things. I did not confront her, because I had no allegation to make. I had a feeling, and 31 years had trained the feeling out of me as a basis for action. So instead I began doing, in my own house, in secret, the thing I had done professionally for 3 decades. And I want to be honest, that it felt filthy, and I did it anyway, and I would do it again. I photographed the electricity bills. The consumption in the backroom circuit had gone up by about 40% while I was away, which meant an air conditioner running for many more hours than stock storage requires. I counted the evening visitors for 11 days and got an average of 9. I noted that 4 of them came on the same days each week. I recorded, on my phone, without her knowledge, about 8 minutes of conversation from the back room in December, which I then could not have translated, because I could not think of a single person I trusted to translate it. That is who I had become by Christmas 2024. A man secretly recording his partner, and then sitting on the recording because he was too ashamed to show it to anybody. I did nothing with any of it. I want to be very clear about that, because there is a version of this where my vigilance saves me, and it is not this version. I gathered evidence for 11 weeks, and I acted on none of it, because acting would have required me to say out loud a sentence I could not say, and because every individual data point had an innocent explanation available, and because, this is the true reason, I was 65 years old, in a country where I had 1 friend and no family, and the alternative to being wrong was being alone. On the 19th of February 2025, at about 9:15 in the morning, there were 3 people at the door, 2 uniformed officers from the provincial police, and a woman in plain clothes from the anti-money laundering office, who spoke excellent English and who did all of the talking. AM was not there. She had left for the cash and carry at 7. I was not arrested. I want to make that clear immediately, because the shape of the story makes people assume otherwise. I was asked to accompany them to the station on Soi 9 to assist with inquiries, and I went. And I was there for 6 hours, and for the first 90 minutes I genuinely believed it was about my visa. It was about a bank. What had happened, and I learned this over the following months in pieces, some from the police, some from the lawyer, some from a woman I will come to, is that a Thai commercial bank's fraud monitoring had flagged a cluster. Dozens of individual accounts belonging to unconnected people across Chonburi province, showing a common pattern, the account holder's card being used at the same small group of ATMs on the same days, in a sequence, by somebody who was evidently not the account holder. The bank filed a report. The report went where reports go, and an investigation followed the ATM footage and the transaction times and the SIM registrations, and at the end of that chain there was a building. The building was leased to me. The electricity account was in my name. The tenancy registration named me as the occupier. And there was one further thing, which the woman from the AMLO put in front of me at about the 4-hour mark, and which is the single worst moment of my life. It was a photograph of a page from a handwritten ledger, not the one I had been shown. A different one, seized that morning from behind the second padlock. And she asked me, quite gently, to confirm whether the entry marked in the third column was a record of funds I had contributed. It was 2.2 million baht in March 2023 and 2.6 million in November 2023, with my name written next to it in Thai script, which she translated for me, and it said, as closely as it can be rendered, Farang money, Nigel. I was not a victim in that ledger. I was a capital contributor. In the columns of a book kept by the operation, I was a funder. The operation was not the Len chair that had been described to me, or rather, it had been, once, or it had used that form as its skin. What it actually was, by the time I put money into it, was an unlicensed lending business, making high-interest loans to people with no access to formal credit, market traders, motorcycle taxi riders, women working in bars and massage shops, day laborers, at rates that the officer described to me, and which I am not going to repeat as a figure, because I do not want to be quoted on arithmetic I cannot personally verify. It was, in any case, a very long way above the 15% per annum ceiling that Thai law allows a private lender to charge, and charging above that ceiling is not a civil matter in Thailand. There is a specific criminal statute for it, carrying imprisonment and a substantial fine. And the collateral, because there is never any collateral in that market, was the borrower's bank book and ATM card, handed over at the point of the loan, held by the lender, used by the lender to take the repayment directly from the account on the day the borrower's wages or benefits landed, before the borrower could touch it. That is the pattern the bank's system saw. That is what a cluster of cards at one ATM at 8 in the morning on the 1st and 16th of the month actually is. It is also, under Thai law as it stands, exposure of a different order entirely, because taking control of another person's bank account and card and using them has been squarely criminalized, and possession of other people's account credentials is treated with extreme seriousness. That is not a technicality about interest rates. That is the machinery of a mule network, whether or not anybody involved thought of it that way. They had, in that back room, a large number of bank books and cards that did not belong to anybody who lived there. At a building leased in my name. I do not have a coherent account of the next part of that interview. I know I asked for water. I know that at some point I said, in English, to nobody, I wrote the training. I know the woman from the AMLO was extremely professional, and that at one point she said something I have thought about every day since, which was, Mr. Nigel, we are not asking whether you knew. We are asking what you signed. I was released that evening without charge. My passport was retained. I was required to report weekly. That lasted 11 weeks. The lawyer I engaged the following morning was recommended by the British consular officer in Bangkok, whose entire manner communicated that this was neither the first nor the 10th time she had had this conversation, and who told me 2 things I have found valuable since. The first was that I should stop talking about what I intended, and start assembling what I could prove. The second was that being a foreigner in this situation is not, in itself, a defense or an aggravation, and that I should stop expecting either. My exposure, as it was explained to me over the following weeks, ran along 3 lines. Whether I could be treated as a principal or an accomplice in the lending operation, given that I had contributed capital to it and it was recorded in the operation's own books. Whether I had, by leasing the premises and holding the utilities, provided the operation with material support, and whether a court would find that I knew, or ought to have known, and, running underneath both, whether any part of my involvement had generated proceeds that made me a party to money laundering, which carries a different and much heavier set of consequences, and which is the thing that stopped me sleeping. There was also, almost comically, the question of whether I had been working without a permit, because I had spent 18 months doing stock reconciliations and driving to the cash and carry. I met Kulap in June 2025, in a coffee shop near the district court, arranged through my lawyer, because she had made a statement, and my lawyer wanted to understand what it said. She was 44. She worked in a laundry on Soi Buakhao and had 2 children, and had borrowed 30,000 baht in the summer of 2023 because her son needed a school fee and a uniform, and there was a deposit on a room. 30,000 baht is about 700 pounds. She gave up her bank book and her ATM card at the point of the loan. She was told it was normal, and it is normal, in that market, which is the entire problem. By the time the police took the ledgers in February 2025, she had repaid. She had the figures, she had written them on the back of an envelope and she read them to me. A little over 140,000 baht against a 30,000 baht loan, and she still owed, according to the operation, 41,000. Because the card was held, the repayment came out first, every month, before rent and before food, and she had twice borrowed again from the same operation to cover the gap the repayment created, which is the mechanism by which that market works, and which I could have explained to a lecture theater in 2011. She did not blame me. That is the thing I found unendurable. She was polite, and she was slightly embarrassed, and she asked me, at the end, whether I thought she would get her bank book back. I put 4.8 million baht into the fund that lent her that money. My money did not do that to her personally. I have no way of tracing a specific baht, and it would be a self-serving exercise if I could. But I contributed capital to an operation whose business model was the thing that happened to that woman. And I did it after asking about yield and default rates, and not asking about her. That is the actual story. Everything else in this is a man's retirement fund, and I have come to feel that my retirement fund is the least interesting thing in it. Aom was arrested on the 21st of February 2025. Her position, as I understand it, and as I am prepared to state it, is more complicated than the headline. She was not the principal. Thawi was closer to the center, and above Thawi there were at least 2 people whose names I have never been told. She kept the ledgers, she held the collateral, she collected, and she recruited borrowers through the shop, which is a serious set of acts and which she did not deny. She also had, on the evidence of the operation's own books, been running an increasing personal deficit to the fund since about the middle of 2023, which my lawyer explained to me as a common structure. The frontline operator is kept perpetually in debt to the people above them, and the debt is the leash. Whether that is mitigation or merely explanation, I have genuinely not decided, and I have stopped believing that I am the right person to decide it. She pleaded guilty. She is serving a sentence and will be out before this decade is over. She wrote to me once, in April 2025, 4 lines, in English, and the only part I will quote is the last line, which was, "I did not think you would be the one they found. I do not think that was cruelty. I think that was the most honest thing anyone said to me in 3 years. I was not charged." And it took until the 22nd of August 2025 to be told that 6 months and 3 days after the door, and the reason was ultimately banal. The operation's own records were meticulous, and they showed a man contributing capital on stated terms, and receiving stated distributions, and having no contact with any borrower. And there was a WhatsApp history of me sending Thawi questions about yield and default provisioning that read, "In the prosecutor's assessment, exactly like an investor being told a story. The paperwork that damned me was also the paperwork that cleared me. I have not worked out how to feel about that. Here is the accounting, because I am constitutionally incapable of not doing it. The 4.8 million baht is gone. It was in a lending book that has been seized, owed by people who cannot pay, and who in many cases are themselves victims. And I will not see any of it, and I have stopped wanting to. About 112,000 pounds. The shop house, 2.94 million baht in key money, fit out and float. The lease was terminated by the landlord on grounds of illegal use, which was his right, and the key money is not returnable, and the fit-out belongs to the building. About 68,000. Legal costs, from February 2025 to August, 930,000 baht. About 21,000 pounds, and worth every penny. Living costs for 6 months in a country where I could not leave, and could not work, and could not sleep, plus a flight my sons paid for, that I made them cancel. Call it 11,000. 212,000 pounds of 420. I have 208,000 and a defined benefit pension of 28,000 a year, and I am 66 years old, and I am, by any global measure, comfortable, and I will not insult Kulap by describing myself as ruined. I am still in Thailand, not Pattaya. I moved to Hua Hin in November 2025, which people tell me is where the boring British go, and they are right, and that is precisely why I chose it. And I want to end by describing what this has actually done to me, because it is not what I expected, and I think it is the most useful thing I have to offer. I check everything now, and I cannot stop. I photograph every document I sign, front and back, before and after signature. I have a spreadsheet of every recurring payment leaving every account I hold, reconciled monthly. And I have reconciled it monthly for 14 months, and it has never once been wrong. I read the Thai on documents using 3 separate translation applications and compare the outputs. I will not put my name on a utility account for a property I do not personally occupy, which sounds sensible and which in practice means I had a 40-minute argument with an electricity office in October. When my new landlord asked whether I wanted the internet in my name, I said no and could not explain why, and watched him decide I was difficult. I have not been in a relationship since. That is not a moral position. It is that I do not currently possess the ability to be in a room with someone I care about and not audit them. And I know exactly how that would feel from the other side. And I will not do that to anybody until I have got it under control. I am seeing someone about it. A British counselor who works remotely, once a fortnight, and her working diagnosis is that 31 years of professional suspicion and 1 catastrophic personal failure have collapsed into each other, and that the checking is not vigilance, it is a compulsion, wearing vigilance as a uniform. She is right. I know she is right because vigilance stops when the check comes back clean and mine does not. So the lesson is not, be more careful. That is the lesson everybody expects, and it is wrong. And if you take nothing else from this, take that. I was one of the most professionally careful men in Britain. Careful was never the problem. The lesson is that expertise does not transfer by itself. 31 years of knowing exactly what a lending book should be interrogated for did not cross the 18 inches between my professional brain and my kitchen table, because I had never once required it to. And nobody ever told me that skills sit in the container you learn them in unless you deliberately carry them out. If you are good at something at work, write down the 3 questions you would ask a stranger, and then ask them of your own life, out loud, at a specific time, on a recurring date. Not because you suspect anyone, because a question you only ask when you are suspicious is a question you will ask too late. And the practical one, which costs nothing, your name on a lease, a utility account, a tenancy registration, or a business address, is a legal claim about who controls a place. It is not administrative. It does not mean the one with the money. In an investigation, it means the occupier. And it will be the first thread anyone pulls. And if you are 6,000 miles away with a video call, it will still mean that. I signed those documents to protect my money. They are the reason 3 people came to my door. I still have the folder. It is on the desk, to my left, and it is 140 pages, and I have not opened it since October, and I check every morning that it is still there.